Well, welcome, everybody. It's so great to see all of you. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I'm sure you're all in the middle of getting ready for the upcoming holiday season and finishing up any work that you have to do. Um, this is the Arch Volunteer and Faith-Based Respite Learning Collaborative. Before we get started, before I introduce our wonderful speaker today, I have just a few announcements, mostly save the dates that I want to make sure you're all very much aware of. As you probably all know, we have the 2025 National Lifespan Respite Conference coming up in April in Huntsville, Alabama, April 1st through the 3rd. We're really, really excited about it. We just notified all of our breakout session presenters of their willingness to participate. So we're going to be getting the conference program up as well, hopefully by early January, finalizing the keynote speakers. Also, as of today, registration is now live, and I will post the link to that in the chat after I've made my announcement. So make sure you have those dates on your calendar. In conjunction with the conference, we will host for the Lifespan Respite grantees and their primary partners, and this is a by invitation only meeting. We'll be holding this the day before the conference, the Lifespan Respite Grantee and Partner Learning Symposium. And we're very actively getting ready to draft an agenda for that meeting as well. For those of you Lifespan grantees and partners who are traveling to that, I assume most of you will come in the day before, and if you do arrive at that time, we will have a wine and cheese reception on the evening of March 31st. So make note of that if you're making your plane reservations already or getting approval from the state for travel. And as we did last year, just to free up time at the in-person meeting, we will be doing the Bring, Brag, and Borrow session. Again, this is just for Lifespan Respite grantees and their partners, the Bring, Brag, and Borrow session, virtually on March 4th and 5th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. In the afternoon. I did send around the invitation this morning for the in-person meeting, and there was a short note embedded in there about the Bring, Brag, and Borrow session, but I'll be sending out a separate email about that because that does require you to register separately also for that virtual event. So watch your inboxes for that. Some other announcements, January 9th, we have our Respite Voucher Learning Collaborative meeting. Please save the date from that, 2:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern. The topic will be on Respite Vouchers 101, getting back to basics. I think this will be most helpful for those of you who are still considering whether you want to implement a Respite Voucher program, or if you're new to program administration, it could be very helpful. We're going to be hearing from some of the more seasoned grantees in the network who have been administering voucher programs for a while, and will share how they got started and how to avoid some of the challenges they faced along the way. On the Sustainability Planning Learning Collaborative, they've really wrapped up their work that they've been engaged in for the last 5 years or so. And we've gotten to the point where they would like to share their expertise and knowledge about what they've learned from their engaging together over the last few years. And so we're going to have a 3-part webinar series on sustainability planning. Again, each webinar will feature an experienced Lifespan Respite grantee or partner who's done incredible work around sustainability planning to share their knowledge and experience. The dates are February 20th, April 17th, and June 12th. And I will send around calendar invitations so you have them on your calendar, but I wanted to make sure you knew they were coming up. And then finally, we have a webinar that we're hosting with the Break Exchange that's based at Marquette University. We're going to be hosting a webinar with our friends from Scotland on inclusive tourism as respite. And this includes programs also like Respitality, where a respite program might partner with a bed and breakfast or a hotel to help provide some real opportunities for a break from caregiving in conjunction with the respite services they provide. And they're very advanced on this in Scotland, so it's going to be a very, very interesting webinar. Again, keep your eyes peeled to your inbox for information about how to register for that event. And that marks the end of my announcements. Again, I'll put the link to the National Respite Conference in the chat. The other private meetings for grantees and partners, you'll be getting those registration links via email. Now I would like to introduce our speaker. We're so fortunate today to have Erica Marks with us. Erica is AgeWell's Director of Volunteer Services. AgeWell is a large area agency on aging in Vermont. She has over 30 years of training and development experience, including a background of psychosocial support. She has spent the last 18 years building and expanding volunteer programs, first for hospice and now for the aging population. And she led the growth and development of AgeWell's volunteer programs over the past 9 years. She took a program that was initially only 100 volunteers and has expanded that to over 1,000 volunteers, one of the largest programs in the state of Vermont. And I would venture to say probably one of the largest volunteer programs, especially for respite in the United States. She and her team created the innovative Volunteer Respite Squad program, which won a 2021 U.S. Aging Recognition Award in the caregiving category. So I'm very delighted to introduce Erica and have her present today. So thank you so much, Erica. Also, for those of you that are on the call, if you'd like to put your name and organization in the chat, that would be great. And then we'll get a sense of everyone who's here today. Thank you so much. We'll move ahead with Erica.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate that. I'm so glad that you were all able to carve out the time today. I know this is a really rough time of year to do anything extra, so it means a lot to me that you've taken the time to be here. Originally when Jill and I talked, I was going to do a presentation about our Respite Volunteer Program, and then in our conversation, we kind of realized that, well, wait a minute, I better talk a little bit about the volunteer program and how it's constructed so that you'll understand, why we are successful and maybe get some ideas about things that you might do for your own programs, because you can't have a respite volunteer program if you don't have a volunteer program. So we're going to do both. And I'm open to answering any and all questions that you might come up with. So but we are the largest area agency on aging in Vermont. We cover the whole northwest quadrant of the state, which doesn't mean anything if you haven't been to Vermont, but we have a very diverse geographic area. So from up to the Canadian border, where you go miles between houses and where people don't have internet connection, and so very, very rural. But we also have Burlington, which is the largest city in Vermont, and kind of everything in between. Our mission really is to help people live the best quality of life they can for as long as they like in their home, because that is the setting where most people really want to be. Our vision is that we aspire to use our Vermont experience to be nationally recognized and to be a collaborative leader in the aging network, promoting health, aging, independence, dignity, and personalized choice, which many of you also do. Next slide. So I thought I would give you a little bit of a snapshot about the kinds of things that those 1,000 volunteers do. So friendly visiting is a very important piece of what we do. You all know that there's a national epidemic of loneliness and of social isolation, especially in the older population. I always tell people we are professional matchmakers, and I want to, this is a key to the success of our program, and so I'm going to spend a few minutes chatting about it. Let's say that Jill lives in Charlotte and that Kara lives in Charlotte, and Jill's a volunteer. Kara's a client. Kara asks for a volunteer. One might assume that I'm going to match Jill and Kara together because they both live in the same town. But that's not how we do things. So, what we do is spend the time up front to really get to know every one of our volunteers. Where did they grow up? What are their passions? What are their interests? What did they do for work? Do they have children? Do they have grandchildren? Do they have pets? We really want to know, to get to know the volunteer well enough to know what are the clients and situations which they would find to be most enjoyable. Then, as we get requests for volunteers, we spend time getting to know the client and understanding more about the client's background and their interest, so that when we're looking to match a volunteer and a client together, we're matching them based on commonalities, based on similar upbringing, or based on common interest, or based on similar careers. We do try to keep our volunteers within 20 minutes of home. We don't want them to have to spend a lot of time driving around in their car. And in the more populated areas, that's easier than in the more rural areas. But we really are professional matchmakers, and we take that part of our job really seriously. And we get it right about 98% of the time, which is, I think, speaks volumes to how much we value making sure that our volunteers enjoy the volunteering that they're doing. So, friendly visiting is a really good example of that. But we also help people with groceries and errands for those folks who are mobile. Maybe they don't have a car, they no longer drive, but they don't have mobility issues. We'll match them with a volunteer that will take them to do those things. And we look at commonalities when we're matching, if they're going to be riding in the car together and going off. We consider that we're reducing social isolation at the same time as we're helping someone get to the grocery store or to the bank, that kind of thing. And for our clients who have mobility issues, who need someone that can shop for them, the gift of a grocery shopping volunteer is everything, because I'm probably preaching to the choir when I say, that most of our older clients who rely on friends and family for groceries are always concerned about being a burden. They don't want to ask too much. And so if you say to your neighbor, "Oh, I'm going to the store, Beth, can I pick anything up for you?" She might say, "Oh, Eric, if you could get me some milk and some eggs and some bread, that would be great." But you'll notice she didn't tell me what kind of milk she wanted. She didn't tell me what kind of eggs she wants. She didn't tell me what kind of bread she wants. Why is she only asking me for three things? Do we believe that those are the only three things she needs? Why is she not being more specific? Well, because she doesn't want to inconvenience me. But when we give someone a grocery shopping volunteer, they can be as specific as they want. They can say, "I only want Land O'Lakes unsalted butter. I only like 2% Booth Brothers milk," whatever it is. And every one of our volunteers goes through 6 background checks. So they don't have to worry about giving the volunteer their EBT card or cash or a check or whatever, however it is they're going to pay. And they don't have to be concerned that the volunteer is going to sneak some of their own groceries on that they're going to pay for, which are often concerns when they're relying on friends and family to get their groceries for them. Meals on Wheels delivery is the biggest of all of our volunteer programs. Last year, we delivered 268,000 meals. 100% of those meals were delivered by volunteers. So the army of volunteers that do Meals on Wheels delivery are just worth their weight in gold. We would have to turn people away. We would have a waiting list. We would not be able to serve everyone that needs meals if we had to pay for that delivery. But our Meals on Wheels volunteers are trained to understand that actually the meal is not the most important part of their job. The check-in on the client is the most important part of their job. And because my Meals on Wheels volunteers tend to like to have a weekly route. And so they see the same clients every single week for months, sometimes for years. I've one Meals on Wheels volunteer. She's been delivering the same route for 20 years. So my Meals on Wheels volunteers know the clients better than we do. If the case manager goes once a month or once every 6 weeks, the Meals on Wheels volunteers go much more frequently, and they are trained to call us. If they see or hear something that if they have a concern about the client for any reason, they pick up the phone and they call us in the volunteer office and share that concern. So we can then reach out to the client and look for whether or not they would be willing to accept other resources and support from our agency. And that's a really important part of what they do. In this day and age, and this didn't used to be the case, we do get requests for help with technology. Sometimes that's, I got a new cell phone, and on my old phone, when I wanted to call my daughter, I would just push and hold one and it would call her. But now my new phone won't do that. Can someone come and help me? Or they got a computer that's new to them, or they have a telehealth appointment for the first time. They've never done a telehealth appointment before, and they want someone to help them practice because they don't know how to do that. And sometimes, and this kind of dips into financial assistance, sometimes they want someone to help them set up their bills on bill pay with their bank so that they don't have to worry about writing out the checks anymore. Or sometimes, like, they don't have a computer, but they want to order something from Amazon. So they want a volunteer that has a tablet or a phone that could come, and they want to put the order in. They'll put their own credit card, the client's credit card for the client, to order for them. So that is another way that sometimes we get technology requests. Financial assistance, we do have, like you do, we have our host of older clients who still receive a paper statement in the mail, and they still balance their checkbook the old-fashioned way, right? And they have macular degeneration, or they have some cognitive impairment, and they'd like a volunteer to come once a month and sit with them and help write out the checks and balance the checkbook. All of which we'll do as long as they are cognitively intact, so that they are capable of being in charge of their own finances. We never take over their finances, but we'll help with the mechanics of it. We do have our minor home repair team, and they're wonderful. They'll go and install a grab bar. They'll go when a Meals on Wheels volunteer calls and says, "Oh my God, Erica's ramp is really green and really slippery, and I almost wiped out today." And they'll go and they'll clean that ramp off, or they'll replace, boards that need to be replaced, or they'll fix a dripping faucet, right? They do all of that. We do have volunteers who have training or a background in the medical field who will help to take clients to their medical appointments. And this is not I just need to get there, a taxi cab or E&D. This is when we have clients who really don't have friends or family that can go with them to their appointment, and they really want another set of eyes, another set of ears, someone to help ask questions, and then maybe take them to the pharmacy to pick up their new prescription on the way home, whatever it might be. We have our respite volunteers. I won't talk about that here because we'll go into that in depth. And like many of you, we have a senior companion program. We do reserve our senior companion volunteers for the more complex cases. So when a case manager, one of our complex case managers, needs a volunteer for a client that's going to need more support, the volunteer needs to have good boundaries, or they need a volunteer more than once a week, we reserve those for our senior companion volunteers. So are there any questions, Jill, that people want to ask before we move on to the next slide?
I apologize. Someone is going to want to hear a little bit how you fund this program, this amazing program.
Okay, all right. And I see someone asking if they're background checked. All our volunteers go through 6 background checks, no matter what kind of volunteering they're doing. How we fund it, that's such a great question because OAA won't pay for a volunteer program. We value the support that our volunteers are able to give to our clients, so much so that we use some of the general fund state dollars that we get. And then we also use a portion of the funds that we raise privately. And then I also am always on the lookout for and apply for grants that would be specific to the volunteer program. So if there aren't any other questions at this point, and I promise you can ask as many as you want, no, volunteers do not pay for their own background check. We pay for them. So you can go to the next slide, Jill. Just to give you the broad picture, current volunteers, I actually have 1,044. On the day I sent this to Jill, I had 1,029, which means that I've picked up 15 volunteers since 2 weeks ago when we spoke. In the last fiscal year, our volunteers contributed 72,945 hours. Call it 73 hours, 73,000 hours of time. And they drove 450,443 miles. By the way, my CEO Googled that and found that that is equivalent to driving around the earth 14 times. It is a huge amount of miles, especially since Vermont is only 160 miles long from one end to the next. When I use the federal volunteer rate, which I update annually, that means that they contributed $2.4 million worth of time. They contributed over $301,000 of miles driven, making their total contribution to our program $2.7 million. In addition to that, they also donated $61,000. So you can see that when you have volunteers engaged in doing exactly what they love to do, they are extremely generous. Any questions about that? If not, you can go to the next slide. So I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, right? Because I built the volunteer program around the volunteers. Most people do it the other way around. So my goal was to reach out to all of those older Vermonters who are retired, who have time on their hands, who are wanting to make a difference in the community where they live, and recruiting them to volunteer with other older folks that lived in their community who needed help. Every year, I do an annual survey of my volunteers because this data is very important and very compelling in getting funding, getting support from your own organization dedicated to the volunteer program, as well as if you're applying for grants. So 515 of my volunteers reported that they would recommend volunteering at AgeWell. I had 516 people who responded to the survey, so all except one. 99% of them are satisfied with being a volunteer. 95% of them volunteer at least once a month. 99.3% agree that the volunteer program are supportive, available, and effective in answering questions. And this is another thing that's really key to having a successful volunteer program. We only use our volunteers on the days and hours that our organization is open. And I have staff people so that if you're a volunteer and you're out in the field with a client and something comes up, you can call us and one of us will answer the phone. And that is really important. There are 5 people every single day who are available to answer the phone when volunteers call in. And it's really important for them calling in about concerns, but it also allows them to feel like they're not in this alone. They're part of a team and we've got their back. And then 94% said they feel like they're making a positive impact, which is really important to them and is often a strong motivator for why they volunteer. So, next slide, Joe. Just a little sampling. I'm not going to make you crazy with this, but I love to be able to share why is volunteering important to the volunteer. It's really easy for our agency to say, oh yeah, the volunteer program is really important. It's because of them that we're able to keep our clients at home. My case managers will tell you, oh my God, if it weren't for the volunteer department, I don't know what we would do. You can certainly understand that if somebody no longer drives, and they have mobility issues and they have no way to get to the grocery store, they could get Meals on Wheels delivered. That's only one meal a day. What about breakfast? What about dinner? How do they get all the other staples that they need? And many of our folks either don't have the financial means to pay, right, for home delivery, or there is not a grocery store in the community where they live that would provide that. So my volunteers do it because they enjoy making somebody else's life a little bit easier. They feel like it's a great way to give back to a community. They want other people who might be less fortunate than themselves to feel valued. It gives them a purpose because when they retired, they didn't realize how much of their sense of purpose came through the work that they did. And this is another way of getting that sense of purpose, even though they're not working. I have lots of volunteers who are paying it forward. You know, their parents needed extra help, but they lived out of state and someone helped their parents. And so now they're paying it forward and giving it back. They really see the value of helping people stay in their homes rather than having to go to a nursing home or move in with their adult children, and that we're all connected in some way, whatever your beliefs are. And this is a way any positive difference they make comes back to all of us. And my respite volunteers, you could not pull them away from the work they do, and you'll hear more about that. But they also say they really love the other people they meet, whether that's meeting other volunteers. And we do have volunteer get-togethers and we do have volunteer appreciation events. We do in-service learning for the volunteers, but they also really like the clients they meet. They meet some really interesting people that they would not otherwise meet. Next slide, Jill. All right, so before we jump into, yeah, you can stay there. That's good. Before we jump into this, are there any questions before I start talking specifically about the Respite Volunteer Program?
I'm not sure if he'll get into this when you start talking about the Respite Volunteer Program, but we did already have a question about how do you recruit your volunteers given the large number that you have?
Yeah, let me talk about that now. I think that's a great question and it makes sense to talk about it here. Here's the best news I could possibly give you. Up until recently, we weren't really doing recruiting because we didn't have to. When your volunteers are happy with what they do, they tell everybody they know. Word of mouth. The volunteers recruit all their friends and family. They're the ones that are out there saying, oh my God, I volunteer with Adriel. You should too. Oh, you can shadow me on a route. Oh, we could deliver the route together. So the volunteers do 90% of the recruiting that happens word of mouth through the volunteers because they love what they do. Then we also creatively engage our volunteers in posting announcements for us that we're looking for volunteers. So here in Vermont, there is a local online forum called Front Porch Forum. It's in every community. And you can, for free, like you can put an announcement on that you're looking for volunteers. And we just said to our volunteers, okay, who's willing to post on Front Porch Forum? The people that were willing to post on Front Porch Forum emailed us. We sent them an announcement to post, and we sent them a schedule. So maybe Jill posts on the first and third Wednesday of every month. Cara posts on the second and fourth Thursday of every month. Trista posts on the first and third Monday of every month. So we took all the volunteers that were willing to post on Front Porch Forum, and they each post twice a month on a specific day of the week, on a specific week of the month. And that is if you want to talk about formalized recruiting, that is the formalized recruiting we do, and it nets us a ton of volunteers because it's specifically a forum for people who are looking for ways to get involved in their own community. So, and then we do the normal stuff. I mean, our development department posts on all the social media, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I'm not on any of those except Facebook. And they get press releases when we do things, and we share it with our partners. So that's how we do our recruiting.
Follow-up question to that, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Erica. Do you find that recruiting the respite volunteers is a little more difficult, or
Oh,
no, not?
no, because we have over 1,000 volunteers. So we recruit first and foremost, the majority of our respite volunteers come from within that 1,000 volunteers. They're like, oh, I can get trained to be a respite volunteer. I want to do that. So when we first started, 100% of the volunteers that we recruited came from our own volunteer pool. Now we have our volunteers who post on Front Porch Forum, who post the respite training announcement for us. And so now we're getting people who were not already Age Well volunteers who want to be respite volunteers. Anything else, Jill?
Someone is asking if you offer any type of insurance for
We do.
volunteers.
So we have this big liability umbrella policy that so if a volunteer got in a car accident, the way it works legally is it's always their insurance that pays first, but then our insurance is sort of the safety net. Same thing if someone gets hurt. So yes, we carry a liability policy for our volunteer program. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions right now.
The respite program specifically, but then we'll open up for questions. And if you thought of something else you want to know, you can ask me. So the first thing that happened is that we had a group of volunteers who are like, well, I can volunteer more. I have one volunteer. This is like the exception, not the norm. But I have one volunteer that said to me, I want to volunteer 5 days a week. I want to support 5 different clients. I worked full time. I don't anymore. I have the time. I love people. Put me to work. I have volunteers that deliver Meals on Wheels and still want to do other things. So they take people to medical appointments, or they do minor home repairs, or they do friendly visiting, like because they want to do more. And so we had volunteers who were willing to step up and support families that needed more help, if you will. And then caregiving families, so families who were caregiving for a loved one, were desperate really for reliable, trained respite help. And they didn't, before we had the respite volunteer program, I'm sure this is true in whatever states you live in, but here, if you hire a home health agency to provide in-home respite, you don't always get the same person every week. So you don't know from one week to the next who's going to show up. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to leave my loved one with a stranger. I'm not comfortable walking out the door, leaving them with a stranger. Just because they're trained, that doesn't necessarily give me the peace of mind I need in order to actually take a break, whether I'm going to a doctor's appointment, whether I'm meeting a friend, and actually have the peace of mind. Like if I have to be worried and watching the clock and hurrying to get back, that's it's given me a break, but that's not really respite, because respite should come with the peace of mind that you can trust who's caring for your loved one, so that you really can just not think about it for 3 hours. That was really important. When we think about respite, that's what we think about. We don't just think of a warm body that's going to stay and keep your loved one safe. Not only that, but on top of that, here in Vermont, if you want to hire one of the home health, a private care agency to send someone in, there's a 3-hour minimum. So you can't hire someone to just come in for an hour. There's a 3-hour minimum. And at $35 an hour, that means that if I had to hire care to go to do grocery shopping, to go to an appointment, to go to my grandchild's concert, to whatever it is, it would cost me $105 for that 3 hours. And that is not affordable for many of the families that we are supporting. So you have both the financial burden, but you also have a warm body isn't the same as someone I can trust. And with our respite program, you get the same person. We match you perfect, like matchmaker, we match you. And then you have that person, same person, same day of the week, same 3 hours every single week, so that they develop a relationship with your loved one and you develop a relationship with them, so that you really do feel safe taking a real break. So if there's questions, Jill, we can go to the next slide. Here's what we did. We developed a 4-session training. So it's 4 weeks. And actually, I'll wrap myself out here. When we first did this, we did a 3-week training. So it was 9 hours, not 12 hours. And and then we brought the very first time we piloted it, we had our volunteers come. 100% of the volunteers who showed up for the training shared that they themselves had been caregivers for someone they loved at some point, and that is why they were interested in taking this training. So we did it, the 3-week training, and then we waited 30 days and we brought them back as a group. And the feedback we got was, we wanted another week. You have to add another week. We want a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. And so that's how it went from being a 3-week training to being a 4-week training, based on the feedback that they gave us. Each of these sessions, when it was originally designed, as an in-person training only. We have since adapted it so that it is a hybrid training. So people can participate in person, which we encourage, but they can also participate online in real time. So that if physically being able to come to the training is a barrier, we've removed that barrier. So that's an adaptation that we made to the training. We really spend our time. The most important thing about offering this training is creating safe space for the volunteers to learn and think out loud with each other and share examples and ask questions. That's the most important philosophical part of this training. We do all the things that you want to do to make sure that your training is having the impact and is effective. So we do have a training survey that all of the participants fill out. So they get on, if they're already a volunteer with our program, they have a brief 15-minute interview where we talk with them more in depth about the difference between being a regular volunteer and being a respite volunteer, to be sure that they actually have the time in their schedule and that they're on for signing up for being assigned to one family for 3 hours a week, same time, same day, for an ongoing period of time. That's one piece that we do. If they're brand new, they're not a volunteer yet, then we put them through the full onboarding. So they go through the volunteer orientation and get onboarded as an age well volunteer, as well as, and then we give everybody it's not a pre-test, it's a pre-survey, so that we get a baseline around what is the information that they already have and their comfort level around being in a position where they would provide respite. And then we do that same post survey at the end so that we can make sure, is our training making a difference? Because we don't want to waste people's time, our own or theirs, right? So we do that. And then we really spend the first session really getting to know them, which you don't see that when you're looking at this outline, because this is an outline of the content, if you will, right? Here are the content areas, but we really do spend a lot of time getting to know them. Everybody goes around the room and they say, what their name is, what community they live in, what kind of volunteering they've been doing, and what motivated them to take this training. Why are they taking this training? What do they hope to get out of it? We spend as much time as we need really hearing from the participants so that we understand, and they get to know each other that way, as well as we also share, so they get to know us. And then the content that we cover really is very much focused around caregiver support. What is respite? What does it mean to provide respite? And what are some of the barriers to providing respite? Why are people maybe a little bit hesitant about even asking for help? And what are some of the common things that you might hear a caregiver say, and how do you know how to respond to those? Like, for example, well, I can't think of anywhere I need to go, so I don't think I need a respite volunteer. Because their assumption is it means they would only need a respite volunteer if they wanted to leave the house. Well, that's not correct. Like, what if you just want to take a nap? What if you just want to go for a walk with the dog? What if you want to catch up on some correspondence? What if you want to wrap some Christmas presents? What if you don't have to leave the house in order to have a respite volunteer, because our respite volunteers have a dual mission. The respite volunteers are there to provide support and engagement with your loved one who you're caring for, but they're also there to provide support for you as a caregiver. So once the caregivers understand that, that's like, oh, so that's a good example of, the kinds of things that might come up where the caregiver might not understand the true benefit that they could get from having a respite volunteer. So we spend a lot of time looking at the ins and outs of all of that. And then we also do a lot of education around the spectrum of cognitive impairments, all the way from one end of mild cognitive impairment to, severe Alzheimer's. Really wanting to help the volunteers understand what that looks like, because we very much are client driven. We're client centered, client directed. And what we want to do is offer help that the caregiver and the client want, but we don't want to take over doing things for or with the caregiver or client that they don't want us to do. And so we really help the volunteers understand what that means. So, are there any questions at this point, Jill, before I keep plowing on here?
Well, we have a big question, and I think you're going to get to, about whether you offer this training to other area agencies on aging to replicate.
So let me say the answer is yes. I accepted a contract with the Division of Independent Aging and Independent Living here in Vermont. They sought me out and said, would you please teach the other area agencies on aging how to build a respite volunteer program? And we offered it to the other 4, and 2 of the 4 took us up on that offer and are now offering respite volunteer programs in their regions. So yes, I designed Train the Trainer, And then all 4 agencies came and their volunteer coordinators got trained. But then they had the 2 that aren't doing it. One was never kind of really on board. They wanted to do their own thing. And the other one had a change in staffing and never got back around to it. But we keep inviting them and hoping that they will. Okay, next slide. So the second session, we now start to expand beyond what does respite mean? How do you support caregivers? How do I understand cognitive decline? All of that. And we spend a lot of time really talking about communication. Because when someone can't communicate verbally, it's important that you understand how to understand them or read their body language or have other clues that you can use in order to figure out how to best support them. So we spend a lot of time, we watch some videos and we do some practice around different ways of communicating. And then we also talk again, and I mentioned this earlier, more about the dual role of the volunteer. The volunteer is there to support the family. The volunteer is not there for the client or for the caregiver. The volunteer is there for both of them. And any other, the family is going to, they're going to define who their inner circle is that they want the volunteer to interact with. And then we do spend some time because remember, I always it's really important, one of the criteria for accepting a request for volunteers for across our program is that it has to be safe, a safe environment to send the volunteer into. And that doesn't just mean physically safe. It also means psychologically and emotionally safe, that we have to be fairly sure that the volunteer won't be taken advantage of. And so that's an important piece. But physical safety, even though we don't provide any hands-on care, I want to make sure that my volunteers know how to keep themselves safe. So, using infection control through, good hand hygiene and understanding all the things that go into infection control in order to prevent themselves from, we would never send them into a situation where there's a contagious disease or there are fleas or bed bugs or those kind of things. Those go without saying that we wouldn't send them in. We also want them to know good body mechanics, and which is in some ways you may say, Erica, why do you do that? Because if Jill were the client and Jill fell while I was there, I'm instructed to call 911 and have them come and assess her and then put her back to bed or take her. That's not, as a volunteer, that's way above my pay grade. But I do know that volunteers sometimes bend the rules. And so it would be silly not to prepare for that. And so I do demonstrate good body mechanics. I also demonstrate for them the proper way to use a wheelchair and a walker. Our volunteers don't transport people who are in wheelchairs. That's considered above their pay grade. But if they're watching someone use their walker in a way that's incorrect, which is actually increasing the likelihood of their falling instead of increasing their stability, I want the volunteer to know that and be able to make that correction, if you will. I do know that I have some volunteers who are retired physicians, retired nurses. And even though I say to them, if the client has an accident, they, I'm talking about a bladder accident or a bowel accident, you would call the caregiver back. You call the caregiver and they would come back home and they would deal with it. That's not your job. And yet, over the years, I've had nurses who are like, that's ridiculous. I worked in the hospital. Okay, Erica, sure, I won't. And then I know they do. So I want to make sure they're wearing gloves. I want to make sure, right? I want to make sure they have all the right information. So that's why I do body mechanics and infection control. Jill, are there any questions at this point?
One quick question. Someone is asking, how long are the classes?
3 hours. They're 3 hours. Each content area, there's 2 content areas per 3-hour session. And we always take a break. We never go more than 90 minutes without taking a break, ever, 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 because they need to get up and stretch their legs. And really, all of us as adults who have no cognitive impairment, 90 minutes is the maximum attention span. So our training, though, is also really interactive. They're learning from each other. We're doing guided activities. We're not lecturing at them. None of this is a lecture format. Yeah. All right, Jill, so you can go to the next. In the third session, we spend our time really diving into the family as a unit of care and looking at all the different ways that people define family and define their inner circle. We talk about the common roles that family members often, take on or have, and how those roles change over time as someone's abilities change. Like basic stuff, and I know you guys know this, but if someone is caring for their husband and the husband is the one that always dealt with the money and wrote the checks and paid the bills, someone else is going to have to take that on if he's no longer able to because he has cognitive impairment. And so there are constantly changing roles within the family as someone's experiences additional declines or losses along the way. And so we really do a lot of exploration of that and of them sharing with each other in their own family of origin. Like, how was it when you were growing up? And now that you're an adult, how does it work in your adult family? So that they can see no two families do it the same way. That's really important for them so that they don't go in with any expectations other than, oh, yay, I'm going to get to learn all about this family and how they do things so I can figure out how best to support them. Same thing with grief and bereavement. We do have an anticipatory grieving activity that we do with them that really brings it home what it's like to experience unexpected little losses all along the way, as well as, how to recognize anticipatory grieving in the families that they are supporting and, communication with the family and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, right? Both of those are important. We do talk about death and dying because that's what each of these families are often looking forward to or anticipating. This person has a terminal illness, which is going to continue to progress to their death. That's why they need a respite volunteer. So we do talk about death and dying, and again, explore all the different ways that families deal with death and dying. And then all of the participants fill out their own advance directives so that they can see like the breadth and detail of decision making that family members need to do as they're preparing for a loved one who won't be able to make those decisions or communicate those decisions for themselves. So that is what we do in our third session. Any questions at this point, Jill?
Don't see any right now.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. In the last session, we spend a lot of time talking about boundaries and doing activities that help to illustrate what do we mean by boundaries and what's a potential boundary issue versus what's a definite boundary issue. And as boundary issues arise, how do I deal with them? So that's really important. Volunteers really love having that information. They feel, you can see I have volunteers who've been volunteering for a while before they take the training, and we get to this section and we start throwing out examples and they're like, uh-oh, oops, I did that one wrong. I didn't realize, but they're really glad to learn, oh, I could have done that instead. Next time I'll do that. So they tend to really like this session. It gives them a lot of peace of mind rather than thinking that they're supposed to figure it all out on their own, because they're never expected to figure it out on their own. And we're always a phone call away. So, and then we have a special closing activity that we do with them that helps them to really assimilate the learning that they've done throughout the course and really share with each other uh, what they've learned from each other and how they hope to use this going forward. So, that in a nutshell is an overview of the 4 sessions which make up the 12-hour training. So, what questions do we have at this point?
Yeah, this is another great question. What is the average length of time a respite volunteer is
Ooh,
supporting a family? And then
such a good
also
question.
both in terms of hours per week or month and in terms of months of supporting a caregiver. And you talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think it's worth repeating.
Yeah, yeah, I will. So they the commitment they make is 3 hours once a week, same day, same time. So the caregiver can plan their self-care around it. Now, that is not set in cement. And what I mean by that is if my client says to me, hey, Erica, I know you always come on Wednesday afternoon, but in January, I have a dentist appointment on Thursday that I made months ago. Is there any chance that you could come on Thursday instead of Wednesday that week? Of course, the volunteer has the flexibility, if they're willing, and if they have the flexibility within their own schedule to make those changes. And they don't have to run them by us. They understand, or by the same token, if the volunteer might have an eye doctor appointment that they set up months ago that falls on the day that they're supporting the family, they could ask, could I come a different day instead? So there's that flexibility within the schedule. Most of our respite volunteers support families anywhere from 3 months. Ooh, I've got one that's just over 2 years now. So it depends on the situation. I would say the average is 3 to 9 months because that's generally sort of the trajectory of when it becomes unsafe for me to leave my loved one at home. They're probably pretty advanced in whatever their impairment is that I'm needing that. And obviously, if it went on for a long time and I thought, oh, I can do this for 6 or 9 months, but they needed more than that and I was no longer available or my availability changed, the volunteer would let us know that and we would replace them with a different respite volunteer to support that family if they couldn't continue. Are there other questions?
Any other questions from anyone? Did you have additional slides, Erica? I'm not.
Yeah, Jill, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So this is the announcement that we use. So we put this announcement out, we put it out, through our network of volunteers. We ask them to share it with any organizations or networks they belong to. We put it out over Front Porch Forum and we put it out over social media. So this is how we advertise for the class. And then there might be one more slide, Jill. Nope, that was the last slide. So I'm completely open to any questions that people might have. You're muted, Jill.
I will open it up to all of you if you'd like to unmute and ask a question or type one in the chat.
I will tell you that the respite volunteers fall in love with the families that they're serving. And they also, they really do feel like they develop a very meaningful friendship. And sometimes they sort of get adopted in as a family member, an additional family member.
I see another
You
question
do
there.
not, so you do not have to be a respite volunteer first, but you have to be onboarded, right? So maybe you're not an age well volunteer, you heard about it in the community, you want to do it. So you contact us, we onboard you as an age well volunteer. So we put you through, that basically means we put you through the orientation and interview that we would, no matter what kind of volunteering you're wanting to do. And then you get to take the class and begin your volunteering as a respite volunteer once you've completed the class.
Couple of questions, Erica.
Sure, go ahead.
Jotting down. I don't want to take away from anyone in the group, but I wanted to ask you, you had some great survey data of your volunteers documenting the benefits of what they're doing and also the benefits of the training. Do you
Mhm.
collect any data on family caregiver outcomes?
Oh, yes. Oh, the family. So every family caregiver, if they call and ask for a volunteer, we have a pre-survey that we do with the caregiver before the volunteer support starts, and we have a post survey that we do with the caregiver. Yes, and we report that data to the state.
Oh, that's wonderful. Are you able to share any of your measurement tools?
Absolutely could. Now I can't share them during this, but I can send them to you, Jill, and you can send them out. I'd be
That,
happy. The pre and post survey for the volunteers and the pre and post survey for the caregivers. Absolutely.
that would be tremendous asset for
Yes.
everyone, I think. I had one other quick question, and that was,
Sure.
do you ever, you talked about how the family caregiver does not have to leave the home and
Right.
making sure they understand that. Do you also ever allow the volunteers to take the care recipient out into the community?
Yes. Yes. Oftentimes I have one respite volunteer by the name of Mike, and he loves to go on road trips. And I matched him with a client who's lived in Vermont forever, who used like his hobby was driving around on back roads, and I matched them together. And his wife gets her break because Mike takes her husband out. And they go out, they have ice cream sundaes, they go on all kinds of adventures. So yes, our volunteers um we do absolutely take the client out as a way of giving a break to the caregiver if that's something that the client and caregiver want.
Well, does that involve any additional liability
Nope.
coverage for your
Nope, my
agency?
volunteers are covered, so
Okay,
they're
they're
allowed to
covered
have
under your
pets,
broad umbrella policy. That's great.
right?
We have a great question here. Do you have a lot of young people who are volunteering?
So 75% of my volunteers are 60 or older. And it's for a couple of reasons. One, they tend to be the folks who have the time. The younger folks are often working full time and raising a family, and just doing extracurricular activities with their own kids often interferes with their ability to commit to this kind of respite volunteering in particular. The other thing is that um, the majority of the clients, all of our clients are 60 or older. That's because that's the population that we serve. And many of our clients feel most comfortable with other people that are closer to their own age than they do with younger people. However, some stay-at-home moms who love to volunteer with their kids. And so we match them with clients that would love to have a mom come with her kid. It's like they get to be kind of a foster grandparent to that kid as part of the visit or to go grocery shopping together. We definitely do that. And then I do have, my folks that are in their 40s and 50s who, because of COVID, are working, they have some kind of hybrid schedule and they're not in the office 5 days a week. And some of their work is from home and it's flexible and they volunteer during their workday. Um, so I have those folks as well.
Have you worked with students in the state, college or high schools? Well, high
I
school would be
I
too young.
have, as a matter, we have a partnership with one of our local colleges. So the issue with college students is that their schedule changes every semester. And so they're not a good choice for respite because respite needs to be predictable in order for it to give the caregiver what the caregiver really needs. But we use our college students for all kinds of other volunteering. In particular, we have a team of college students that deliver Meals on Wheels. We have a team of college students that do grocery shopping for people. So those are the kinds of things that are more flexible and therefore easier for younger folks to do. All of our medical students, this is an interesting partnership that we have with UVM Medical Center. Any of their docs that are training to be community docs, they all shadow Meals on Wheels route so they can get a better understanding of the types of clients that we're serving. They also shadow one of our case managers on a visit in the community. And then we have a particular social work instructor at the university who makes it an option for all of her students to either shadow Meals on Wheels or help at one of our community meals as a regular part of their coursework. And I personally take interns from the local colleges. I have one now. I love her. I'm going to hire her when she's done. I do hire them whenever I can. And I have two other departments at Agewell that also take interns and sometimes hire them.
Very interesting. A lot of our lifespan grantees and partners have started working with nursing schools or undergraduate programs to provide regular respite services, either as part of their curriculum. And that
Excellent.
might only be for one semester, so it might not be as long lasting as some of your volunteers. Or they have regular weekly out-of-home events that wouldn't necessarily, for different age populations that might not pertain to this particular group of clients, but very, very interesting. Does anyone have any other last minute questions? Well, not last minute, we still have some time. If you have any questions and would like to unmute and speak to us directly or put anything else in the chat.
I would say one other thing, Jill. We are now taking this training and we will be offering it to all 1,000 volunteers as 90-minute in-services. So they do not need to take all 12 hours of the training, but any volunteer that is interested in any piece of the training, starting next year, will be offering each component, each 90-minute component as a standalone in-service training so they can take any piece of it that they're interested in.
Wonderful. You did talk also about, in terms of replication of your program, working with independent living and other area agencies within your state, but I'm wondering, do you have suggestions for the first steps that a program outside of Vermont might be able to take to start up a program, or can they borrow your training?
Yeah. So what I've done is I've put a link to this training on Agewell's website. So you can go there and that will give you, the 4-session outline. And then if you're interested in trying this, you just call me. And we have, I have a facilitator's manual, I have participant manuals that are very, very detailed, that absolutely down to the minute. I have recordings of the training that we've done. So yes, anybody who wants to try this, it doesn't do any good if I'm the only one doing it. I would love to see capacity across the nation. And so I'm more than willing to share. I'm willing to co-facilitate a session because you could team me in online. I am willing to entertain helping anybody who wants to do this.
We're getting lots of positive accolades in the chat about that, and that's very generous of you, Eric, and I'm sure lots of people are going to take you up on that. So thank you so much for letting us know that.
He has the old time look there. I like it. It's like a classic traditional look.
I think Kate has a question.
I'm sorry, I thought someone else. Roxanne, do you have a question? Because you're unmuted.
There you go.
Okay. Yes, I do.
Kate, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. And thank you, Erica, for this amazing presentation. I was wondering about your training. Is it evidence-based or evidence informed at all? And did you may have said it and I may have missed it. Is that free if replication is possible? Thank you.
Yes, it's free. And it is, it's as evidence-based as it can be, in that, when I used to do, a lot of what we do comes from the hospice training, which I used to do, which has been adapted for this particular population. I would love, I shouldn't say this, but I would hope that this could be put through the scrutiny required in order to become an evidence-based program that could then be made available nationwide.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. Taylor has a question.
Sorry, I was just applauding the fact that
Oh, I'm
you're
sorry.
including this to be free to help with replication, that you're so willing to reach out and let people take this on. I know I personally been trying at the low end of the totem pole to get something like this up in our area. So having something to model that's showing it's working is amazing. And I'm so appreciative that it's free. Because we all know, especially if you're the low man on the totem pole, you got to get those approvals. So I appreciate you. I did drop my email in the chat because I will definitely be taking you up on meeting with you.
Yeah, so please email me directly, Taylor, so that we can set up a time. I'd love to do that.
And I did have Erica's email address in the slides, and you should be able to download a copy of that. But I'll send them around when we send the recording.
And I'll send the pre and post surveys so you can send it with that.
We'll send all the resources, wonderful resources Erica talked about today to all of you. Any other questions? I just wanted to quickly say that I think, Erica, your program checks off every box that Arch has for a best practice in volunteer services. And I just want to reiterate some of these themes, and please fill in where I'm missing something. But I think there are three overarching issues related to success of a volunteer respite program. One is doing an excellent job of matching family caregivers, care recipients with the volunteer. That's really critical. And you really seem to take the time to do an excellent job of making sure that people are compatible geographically, age-wise, whatever the important issues are, that's taken into account. The second one is being able to provide consistent volunteers over whether it's 3 months or 9 months or 2 years. And that does seem to be relatively sustainable, that you're able to do that for some extended periods of time. And I think that's really critical. And the last one really is the success of your program, I think, is due to the strong supervision and support and initial and ongoing excellent training that you provide to your volunteers. And all of these things are really critical, because so many of us, we think volunteer program and we think, oh, free, it's, wonderful for everybody, it's free. But these services do require an investment of time, resources, staff,
Absolutely.
And being able to provide this kind of in-depth support. It's not just we're going to go out into the community, train a bunch of volunteers, and then they're on their own to go provide respite. And I sometimes see the trend moving in that direction, and it worries me. So when I see a program like this that's engaged in matching, that's engaged in strong supervision and support and training, that we wind up with a much more successful program. So thank you so much. If I left any of critical components out to what a successful volunteer program
No,
is.
you hit them all. I mean, I get my fair share of criticism because there are younger people who want to volunteer in the evening and they want to volunteer on the weekend. And my answer is always, I will never ask a volunteer to volunteer outside of the hours that we're available to support them. So when my organization, if they ever decide to have evening hours or weekend hours, then we can look at expanding our volunteer program. But until that happens, the answer is no. Because that support is critical to the volunteer.
I totally agree. Any other questions? You have a wonderful resource here to take advantage of for another few minutes if there are any more questions. Thank you so much, Erica. Excellent presentation, and I'm so glad we've developed this relationship for ongoing resources and support. So Arch will also be in continuous touch with you as well. So
that's great, and I always feel honored when I get invited. So invite me as much as you want.
well, we may take you up on that. That's wonderful. Thank you all so much. We'll give you a few minutes back of your very busy holiday season. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you again to Erica. And hopefully we'll see you all in Huntsville in April, and have a really wonderful holiday season, everyone. Thank you.
You.
Take care.